Welcome to another episode of the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. A progressive insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining podcast designed to shine a light on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters, located in his attic, here's the award-winning Pat Johnston.
Oh, yeah! Welcome to another installment of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I'm your host, Pat Johnston. And don't worry, you guys know that I have many forms of escape out there that are like movies and reading and music and taking walks and, yes, of course, sports. And that means I will set aside 2 minutes to have some words about the demise of our Detroit Lions, which I will do at the end of this week's episode. But I still can't believe that after 15 wins and after a 2-week build-up to their first playoff game as the number 1 seed, that's it. It's all over. They've been ousted. I'll have more on that at the end of this week's episode. Coming up in a few moments, I'll be speaking with another one of my favorite strong progressive voices that we've got not only here in the Michigan legislature, but in the Michigan Democratic Party. State Representative Betsy Coffia will join me to talk about where she thinks Democrats will go from here with the start of another Trump presidency and the start of an extreme right-wing MAGA Michigan Republican majority in the state house. Representative Coffia has been speaking some harsh truth ever since the election, where she talked about where Democrats both inside the state of Michigan and nationally went wrong and where they can demonstrate to all voters out there, and especially to those millions of potential voters who sat out this election, how Democrats can demonstrate how they are the party that stands with the entire working class. Plus, Representative Coffia will talk about the disaster that was the lame duck session thanks to the Democratic leadership in the state house, and she'll talk about what lessons can be learned from that wasted opportunity. So Representative Betsy Coffia will be coming up here in a few. Now, my interview with Representative Coffia was supposed to be part of last week's show. However, as probably some of you had noticed, there was no show last week, and, well, I will now tell you why. My mom, Teresa, passed away rather quickly last week. She was 71, and she died just a couple of weeks before her birthday. So we drove downstate to be with my dad, of course, and to kind of lean on each other during that time. Many of you, of course, have gone through similar experiences. I received so many heartfelt messages from family and friends, some friends I hadn't really talked to in a number of years, but it was still great to hear from them. And, you know, those messages, they really and truly do help you at times. My mom's health wasn't the greatest, but still, you're never exactly prepared when it does happen, no matter how much you might try to set yourself up for that eventuality. And so it really did hit all of us like a ton of bricks. I've been spending time thinking about so many different moments involving my mom and my life. I don't know if some of you out there are like me, but I can remember certain things like they happened yesterday. And then there are things that happened, like 3 months ago, and I have no memory of them whatsoever. But for me, there are certain memories that are kind of like a vivid snapshot. Not so much, where there's a beginning, middle, and end to the memories, but moments that I can always go to, I can hear them, and I can just see them, and, they never leave. They're really just imprinted in my mind. And I've been doing that a lot when it came to my mom here lately, obviously. Like, I can remember hearing her voice above everyone else's when I made my first ever basket in a Little League basketball game, or her constant whistling while she would tidy up the house. Or I remember when she and I were standing on the grassy knoll in Daly Plaza in Dallas, Texas for the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination. That would have been 2013, right? Yeah. And I remember that we were overlooking Elm Street where JFK was shot and killed. And I had this I don't know, little moment of revelation. I don't know. Just something came over me as I was looking at Elm Street, seeing again where he was shot. And I said, after all of the places he visited and after all the people he met and after all the history that he was a part of, I don't know, it's just sad to think that it all came to an end right in this little space. Really was not a historic space whatsoever before November 22nd of 1963. And I just remember saying, it just all came to an end right here. And, a few seconds went by and my mom said, yeah, but, look around. It's kind of a peaceful place. And I looked around and said, Daily Plaza peaceful. But then, you look around and it is just this, I don't know, this little enclave amidst this bustling downtown. But I looked around and I said, yeah, I guess you're right. And I don't know. I mean, we were always big readers and we were just so interested about JFK's assassination. It's one of the many things that bonded us together. But she also knew how to offer some kind of insight that, I wouldn't be thinking about ever. And that's because my mom was always very perceptive and very aware of her surroundings. Both of my parents were politically active ever since they were young. They marched against the Vietnam War, and then they would march again against George W. Bush during his regime, and of course during Donald Trump. They always made sure that my brother and I watched the news. They always made sure there were newspapers around, magazines. I remember we had Time, and I think we had Newsweek magazines. They wanted us to make sure that we were informed about what was happening around the world. Yes, there were lots of talks of sports at the dinner table at times, but many other times there were talks about news and politics. And my mom's first president that she could remember was JFK, so she always had a soft spot for the Kennedys. Well, except for Robert Kennedy Jr. in the last few years here. He really incensed her. But I remember that she was also comforted in knowing that the entire Kennedy family denounced his allegiance to Trump. I do remember that. But yeah, my parents always made sure that we would be informed at all times. And so whenever we would have some friends stay over for dinner or whatever, our friends would get to experience what it would be like to sit around the table and talking about issues of the day, and where my parents would be challenging us for our beliefs and our opinions on certain issues. And so I guess that's where you could say it all started for me in wanting to share my opinions and my beliefs and my values with a listening audience. My mom always stuck by her progressive beliefs throughout her entire life and wasn't afraid to push back when someone, especially those in the family or those who were friends, tried to shovel some conservative crap her way. She wasn't a wallflower. She wasn't just going to sit there and listen. She would push back when it needed to be done. She was never one to hide her feelings, and she wore them on her sleeve, and that included her politics. I know that she was always happy that I was fighting the good fight, being a progressive voice in the conservative talk radio format, and I know she was proud that she raised someone who wasn't bashful to share his viewpoints, particularly against those who were right-wing. Yes, there were many times that she would ask me, how can you work at a place like conservative talk radio where the people are just insane? And I'd say, hey, I agree, but somebody's got to be offering the sane, the common sense, the progressive opinion, right? So let that be me. We were an NBC family, so that meant Tom Brokaw was on every night when I was growing up. And when my mom's mom, my grandmother, would stay with us, I remember whenever there was a story with Ronald Reagan, and the news would play a soundbite of him talking some kind of nonsense that Ronald Reagan would do, both my grandmother and my mom would simply laugh in complete disbelief, wondering how the hell this guy was the leader of the free world. It's a memory that has always stuck with me because there were many, many nights like that. I mean, I can hear their laughs right now with stories about Ronald Reagan on TV. I can tell you that she was equally appalled, probably even more so, when Donald Trump won in 2016, I remember how elated and relieved she was when Biden defeated him in 2020. And I'm proud that even in a losing cause, that her last presidential vote was cast for a black woman, something that she maybe thought she would never really get to do. One of the last political statements or questions that my mom asked me, and it happened last Christmas, was, Pat, how are we ever going to get through these next 4 years? Yeah, well, Mom fought the good fight for the progressive side for her entire life, backing national and local candidates that shared her values of improving and becoming a more enlightened society. She fought that fight to the very end, and in the spirit of one of her favorite presidents, she's passed that torch now to a new generation. I'll do my best, as will my family, to keep fighting and believing in the values that she always believed were worth fighting for. My mom always liked that Robert Frost poem that JFK quoted many times. It was from Frost's poem called Stopping in the Woods on a Snowy Evening, where he said, and I think you know that I'm quoting here, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." I won't quit, and I won't give up because I believe, maybe foolishly, I don't know, but I do believe in the good of people, and I believe in making the impossible possible. So did my mom, and I'll keep her political spirit alive by continuing to give voice to the voiceless and by always giving my viewpoints until it's my turn to pass that same torch to the next generation. So thank you, Mom, for helping shape the man that I eventually became, and thank you for supporting whatever I decided to do with my life. Love you very much. We all have our torches that have been passed down to us and that we can pass to others. You know, I've said it here before, and I'll share it one more time. You guys know that I'm a huge fan of the 70s TV show MASH, which, again, I have my parents to thank for that. And there's an episode where Hawkeye and BJ use some dirty yet moral tactics to stop an adversary. Okay, I guess that that could describe many episodes of MASH. Anyway, in this particular episode, the adversary says to them after he knows he's been beaten, he says, "Okay, you stop me, what? You think you can stop others like me across Korea, across the entire country?" And BJ says, "No, just our little corner of it." I think that's how we progressives should think right now, and it's something you've heard me stress repeatedly right here throughout the years. Look, the new Trump regime has started, and he and his billionaire tech bro backers are already running out of the gate with all kinds of executive orders, like pulling out of the Paris Climate Change Accord, reversing President Biden's plan to lower prescription drug costs for seniors and for those on Medicaid, or pardoning all of the January 6th insurrectionists, including those with Nazi sympathies and those who attacked Capitol police officers. Look, it's going to be very, very, and incredibly overwhelming, which is exactly what the oligarchs want you feeling right now. They want you feeling overwhelmed and defeated. They want you feeling like there's no reason to fight. They want you feeling that they have the mandate, that you are the minority. However, back to making your corner of the world better, maybe it's time for progressives to hone in on what's happening in their own backyard again. We saw progressive victories on the local level in Delta County last year when the people there voted out incompetency and extremism when 3 MAGA county commissioners were kicked out in recall elections, and now they've given up. They've given up. We saw in Ottawa County where extremists lost their grip of control in that county commission, and there have been gains in Grand Traverse County as well in that county commission where progressives are one by one defeating Trump wannabes. So as I've always said, change happens faster on the local levels, and perhaps that's where Michigan progressives should start searching for places where they can make change happen quickly. They can make a difference in people's lives quickly, because if you stop MAGA on the local level, then you become stronger to stop them at the state and national level. It's about playing the long game. That's where true resistance can really begin. And then perhaps true progressives can begin growing their numbers within the state Democratic Party, which desperately needs some changes. Because on the local and state level, That's where the next fight will be here in 2 years, everyone. And that's why it is imperative to have progressives like Betsy Coffia in Lansing. She does not mince her words, and she not only fights, she wins elections because she actually increased her 2024 margins from her first win in 2022. So maybe we should listen to some of her ideas. And by the way, we will. State Representative Betsy Coffia is my guest this week, and she's coming right up in a sec. You're listening to LOL.
It's Michigan's premier progressive podcast, Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. If Pat's brand of progressive pontifications is getting you all riled up and you'd like to give him a piece of your mind, or if you'd like to tell him he's doing an outstanding job and to keep up the great work, just email him. That's leftoflansing@gmail.com. Do you have stories you think Pat must know about or guest ideas for future episodes? That's leftoflansing@gmail.com. Want to share your thoughts on how to grow Michigan's population or which flavor of Faygo Pop is the best? It's rock and rye, by the way. Just email Pat, leftoflansing@gmail.com. Now, here's Pat.
All right, I've been looking forward to speaking with my next guest since the election because she's been speaking some plain English on how we've arrived not only on another Trump administration, but as to how Michigan Democrats lost the majority in the state House. Democratic State Representative Betsy Coffia is starting her second term in the House after winning re-election in that area, which hasn't always been the kindest for Democrats in recent history. And Representative Coffia represents Leelanau, Grand Traverse, and Benzie counties, and I am ecstatic to have her here on Left of Lansing this week. Representative Coffia, welcome. Thanks for being here, and Happy New Year.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Happy New Year to you as well. It's great to speak to you.
All right. It's great to have you back on again. There's so much I want to cover, but if I may, you shared something on social media recently, and I thought that would kind of serve the purpose of setting up the tone for our discussion here. And in that post, you said, and I'm quoting here, "Dear National Democrats, if your actions are reminiscent of Neville Chamberlain, you're doing it wrong." So what made you express that kind of level of dissatisfaction with the National Democrats?
Well, and it's not all, thankfully, but, I'm seeing a little too much capitulation. Let's just make nice with the guy that we've spent the last 2 years telling our base is an authoritarian. A little too conciliatory for my taste. I think that people are looking for Democrats to stand up and make it clear that they're going to, fight like hell for basic human rights, whether it's against the national abortion ban or targeting immigrants or LGBTQ folks, cutting services. Like, I come from very humble, very working class rural roots. I grew up in a family that couldn't afford health care, and some of the cuts they're talking about making to programs that are vital for especially lower income families, whether it's the corporate wing or the political wing, I'm seeing a little too much normalization of somebody that we had all agreed and had pretty clearly established he wants to be an authoritarian. So that's more what I was talking about. And I don't think it's appropriate or inspiring much confidence in everyday voters when we are kind of bending over backwards to make nice with this guy. He is not our friend.
I've also been complaining about the same thing. I'm just going to echo you here just for a second, but I just see it as it's how some Democrats are guilty of sending these mixed messages to those who really back them. I mean, for the entire campaign, many of them were saying, as you just mentioned, that Trump was an existential threat to democracy. And then after the election, it's like some of them are saying, oh, well, we really didn't mean all that stuff. I don't think that helps the Democratic Party brand when that kind of thing is happening.
Look, we are in a time in our history where there's historically low trust in political leaders to begin with. And the Democratic Party kind of got its tush handed to it in this election, losing to somebody who is a convicted felon who literally staged a violent insurrection. And, some of what's going on here is voters need to be able to believe we are who we say we are, and we're going to show up the way we say we're going to show up. So I think beyond branding, it's like, do you believe in what you're saying or don't you? And if you are giving people a reason to doubt because the election doesn't go your way, that you have principles and you have courage and you're going to take a stand to fight for their rights, if you give them doubt, that is going to undermine both your ability to be a good leader and, frankly, your re-election chances, if that's all they care about. Look, there are a lot of great folks I work with in the House, some of the very best people I've ever met. over in the Senate, at the state and the federal level. There are lots of really fine folks who are working very hard, but I feel like some of the folks with the microphone at times, they do send mixed messages and it introduces the question. So all those hysterical emails telling me to give money, you didn't actually mean what you said? And then that, I think it erodes people's decision to even engage in democratic politics. And if we ever want to dig ourselves out of this hole that we're in the Trump era, we better be building real trust with people and standing up for them.
Absolutely.
No question.
Absolutely. Let's say you were in control of the National Democratic Party. Let's just say, hypothetical, of course, but what would you say should be the Democratic Party's brand?
So what I can tell you is what I have been doing in my district, and I am a state rep from Northern Michigan. I am in the state legislature. I am not running the national party. But what I have done, and in my race, even though Michigan, we lost the House and we had kind of a bad night across the board, my region was one of the only ones that actually outperformed. I went from a 0.4% win in 2022 to a 4.2% win, highest voter turnout in the state. Really, when you look at the map, everybody kind of has those red arrows trending the Republican way, and we actually significantly trended more Democratic. I can speak from what has worked up here, which is you show up, you listen to people's lived experience, you don't run away from your values. People up here know that I am a pro-choice Democrat and that I will fight like hell for our reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy. They know that I'm strong on LGBTQ rights. I actually do believe in climate science. I took what some would consider tough votes on gun safety because I think kids should be able to be safe in their schools, and we have to have common sense on gun safety. And I make sure that people know that I listen to them and I'm believing their lived experience when they are worried about their housing costs up here going through the roof, right? The cost of living, talking about real things that people are experiencing instead of sort of showing them a chart about how the economy is great. And I sometimes say the consultants who write Democratic messaging, I think a lot of them live in a bubble where their portfolio is doing great. So they sort of extrapolate and put out on everyday working people, out the voters, that you're fine. Well, that sounds condescending and out of touch. Like, meet people where they are, believe them when they talk to you about their lived experience, and show them the receipts about what you are doing to try to make life better for them, for their families, for the whole community, regardless of who people vote for. I mean, a number that I'm really focused on, Pat, is 36 million. That's the number of people who didn't show up at all to vote. And it was more than voted for Harris or Trump. That is a large segment of the American population who has really come to believe that their life isn't going to get better whether a Democrat or a Republican is in charge. And so I think being authentic, treating people with respect, focusing on real economic issues and believing them when they're saying, yeah, maybe I got a raise, but the cost of everything has gone up. What about corporate price gouging? What are we substantively doing with that? And can we get out of the pocket of corporations enough to actually take a stand on consumer protections? That sort of thing. I mean, that wasn't a short answer, but I think it starts with some of that. Be authentically a Democrat and be authentically on the side of everyday working people who are struggling to make ends meet. Healthcare, childcare, right? Housing, it's all getting too expensive.
And you just brought up a great point, and I thought maybe this is where some of the strategy was wrong, was that I think there was a lot of work to try to siphon off a couple of Republican voters, and fine, okay, that's all right, but you just mentioned it. There were so many people who didn't vote, who feel disillusioned that it doesn't really matter who's in power, and I think that somebody's really got to tap into that voting block or potential voting block and see exactly what are they saying and how can we bring them to the polls. Working
class people in my district did vote for me. And so did, frankly, a lot of moderate Republicans. We flipped 4 precincts outside of the city of Traverse City. So in the more rural red and purple areas of our district, we flipped 4 from red to blue in this election season. And we also had strong voter turnout in the working class precincts. I come from the working class. That's my background. I tell my story. My mom cleans houses for a living, right? Hardest working woman you'll ever want to meet. And we couldn't afford to go to the doctor when we were sick, right? Working class people, I'm very proud to have the support. I actually just saw my pizza delivery guy last night. His name is Gabe, and I ordered a pizza because I didn't have time to make dinner. I've never been prouder of when Gabe knocked on my door to deliver a pizza during the campaign and was like, I just doubled my contribution to you from $5 to $10. Nice. Like, that's what he could do. And if I ever lose that, I have a lot of people in my district who are working class people, but they believe me when I tell them I am there to fight like hell for you, just like the CEO at the hospital. just like the superintendent of the school, just like our business community. I am here fighting for all of us. Them believing me and my grassroots donations and the amount of volunteer energy that we have, like that is my way of always checking in and saying, am I staying true to you're there to fight for and work for everyone in your district? So I think it's a mistake to walk away from working class concerns. I'm an FDR New Deal Dem. I'm a Paul Wellstone Democrat. We all do better when we all do better. And Democrats who think, oh, we'll make it about this lofty save democracy thing and kind of stray away from. I thought Harris had great early messaging about her mom with like saving enough money to finally buy their own home, right? And taking on the big corporate greed who, like during the foreclosure crisis, all those families in California, but then somebody got in her ear and they took it away from that message to something that, I mean, democracy is a lofty thing to be thinking about when you're worried about how you're going to keep food on your kid's plate and a roof over their head. But, you know, there was this bet to like, let's stray over in the Liz Cheney direction of the party at the exclusion of talking about economic justice issues. Whoever was giving her that advice couldn't have been more wrong.
Speaking of consultants, are Democrats, or Michigan Democrats I'm talking about now primarily, especially those who may be more progressive, are they advised, or were you ever advised to hide away from certain votes or certain stances or to avoid just being an outright progressive Democrat?
It's a very interesting thing getting to Lansing. There's all these unspoken rules and, you know, codes and things that you're supposed to just do and kind of figure out by osmosis that are often not said directly. I figured out about halfway into my term that because I was what they called a frontline swing seat, right? I won by less than 800 votes in 2022, that I was supposed to be very afraid of all of the traditional Democratic votes, whether it was on, you know, standing for labor or gun safety or reproductive. Like there was just sort of this script. I've even posted about it in the past. I realized that there was this sort of script written for, quote, frontliners where we were supposed to kind of be scared of our own shadow. And in a single seat majority, that would give a reason not to maybe move those bills. And I was very grateful that I came in with a class of freshmen swing seat Democrats who weren't afraid of that. We ran on those things. We're Democrats. And we took those tough votes. And I outperformed. Joe Andrews is a great example. He outperformed in his district, right? John Fitzgerald did. There are those of us who did well. And where we didn't do as well, I think there's some room to look at. I refuse sort of a one-size-fits-all messaging branding that the party's consultants, the caucus's consultants sort of tried to foist on all of us. And I was kind of a problem child because I said, no, the messaging and the mail and the digital and the way we're talking to our voters has to look like this district and this candidate. It's not the same as other parts of the state. And I outperformed. I think we have to step back and expect our consultants to earn their money and actually have a tailored district-specific strategy. And in the seats that we lost, I think there were wins that we should have made sure to give policy-wise. Like Jen Hill should not have lost in Marquette. She needed that corrections officer pension bill, and she was shouting from the rooftops, I need to get this done for my district. It's what we need up here. And our leadership, for some God knows why, waited till after the election to even take the vote, and she lost. So it's policy that like shores up frontline seats showing that you've got the local wins. And it's like, let us be Democrats.
Since you brought up the leadership, and I don't want to put you on the spot, so you don't have to answer anything, but can you talk about the frustrations that you, and it sounds like from what I've been hearing and reading in various publications, there were lots of frustrations to go around when it came to the leadership in the House, especially during the lame duck. Can you talk about that a little bit?
All I will say about lame duck is that I was a squeaky wheel in my caucus, that I felt it was a fatal flaw to push so much critical Democratic priority legislation that a lot of myself and my colleagues worked on and was ready to go in some cases a year ago. It was a fatal flaw to push it into lame duck for a lot of reasons, but frankly, one of them was it was talked about in our caucus, you know, not officially by our leadership, but we, knowing that we had a colleague who was known to not come to work, who was known to be very friendly to the Republicans. Mm-hmm. And when you have a single seat majority, to risk that that one member could do something to blow the whole thing up as the clock is ticking felt like a really questionable approach. And I was really worried for about a year, especially after we lost the majority with the mayoral races. And then we lost 4 months because of that. I said, guys, we need to move everything we can during regular session. So it's not really a secret that I was not on the same page with the speaker's office. I was just more vocal than a lot of folks about it. And I'm very sad, really devastated that in fact exactly was what happened.
There were so many different bills out there that if they would have passed maybe before the election, I think that would have helped Democrats even more. I mean, you were talking about just even with local politics with Jen Hill and everything up there. For instance, if government transparency, something that you've been championing, something that you've been pushing for a long time, if that would have passed before the election, I've got to think that would have been very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the ethics and transparency package, that to me is a foundational thing. If we want people to have any kind of belief in and trust in their government, Michigan has one of the worst for campaign finance reform, for ethics and transparency. We have been ranked by the Center for Public Integrity for the last several years at or close to the bottom in all 50 states. That's nothing to be proud of. And we've had scandals with the Chatfield thing, in which we got charges were dropped. That we should have met that moment. And myself and several colleagues had worked for many months on a package of ethics bills that you'll have to ask the speaker why he refused to allow those to move. But I think that was a huge mistake. I think it would have helped us. Myself and a lot of my colleagues in swing seats got beat up hard during the campaign for doing nothing on ethics and transparency. We should have, we could have. You run that bill on the board and I dare the Republicans to vote against it. It would have passed with broad bipartisan support. But the speaker calls the shots, what gets to run. And again, you'll have to ask Joe Tate why he refused to run those bills.
Do you feel like it's something, Representative Coffia, that I have talked about a lot here during the last couple of months? I even had a writer with the American Prospect, David Dayan. He reported on this as well about what was happening during lame duck, even before. But do you feel like there was too much, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess prioritization to put like corporate subsidies ahead of everything else, things that would also help the working class?
Okay. As a freshman, I was startled by the emphasis by this new Democratic trifecta on corporate priorities from the jump. I mean, the first month in with this SOAR fund, et cetera. And I was very involved after that initial round. You just walk in the door and this is the big push from the governor's office, from the speaker, et cetera. I was very involved in a SOAR reform package that really would have significantly improved that and made sure that the funds go directly toward thing that we've heard from our local community, whether it's public transit. We had a reform package that would have done a public transit trust fund, dedicated additional stream of funding for addressing our housing crisis, things that are on the ground, local priorities for how you stimulate your economy and support your workforce and your small businesses. Yeah, I think that Lansing has run in a certain way for a very long time. And there are some very, very, very powerful corporate interests who have been kind of calling the shots. And I think that's part of why we need campaign finance and ethics reform to blunt their influence. Because right now, I think Dana Nessel said, it's like we have so many holes in our current system that it sort of invites abuses. It invites sort of, I will say, drawing elected officials away from who we're actually there to work for. The everyday citizen cannot afford to take us to a 2-hour lobster dinner and with endless drinks. They cannot pay for us to go on some fancy trip. They shouldn't be expected to compete with that nonsense. And I think we really need to curtail that culture in Lansing, or we are not going to get much better results. And we need them. We deserve them. We have a state with 41% of our households are barely paycheck to paycheck. 41%. That should haunt everyone in this state, Democrat or Republican. We have a lot of work to do to be more focused and more accountable to the everyday constituents. And the corporate lobbyists should be put in their place instead of running the show. I want to make very clear, I do not raise a dime from corporate lobbyists. I don't take corporate PAC money because I think there are a lot of very good people who that's just sort of how you raise money right now. But I think we need to change the game because it does on some members of the legislature, it does have impact. I've watched it in the last 2 years, and I want my people in my community to know that I work for my constituents, not corporate lobbyist clients. And we could and we can, as the legislature, make changes. But I just want to be very clear that I've made that decision because I think for me, that's what works best for me to know that I'm staying sort of true north.
All right. My last question, and thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. With Republicans back in control of the state house, what expectations do you have, and what kinds of legislation will you continue to pursue, even though Democrats don't have the majority?
So look, what's really interesting about for me, like trying to make sure that I'm representing Northern Michigan and being the best representative that I can be, regardless of who is in charge of the House, the Senate, the governor's offices. I take my marching orders from my district. I always have. I always will. I did as a county commissioner too. The top areas of focus for me in my first term had to do with addressing our housing crisis, addressing our mental health crisis. We have no mental health beds for young people in this region, period. And it's a huge issue. So mental health, housing, childcare, healthcare access, agriculture. I have a large, cherries and apples and wine and a lot of small family farms. So a lot of my focus supporting our education system, right? I got the first rural transportation equity fund for our school districts so that our big rural schools with their big old bus routes, that they would actually have enough money to cover the enormous cost of transportation, just getting kids to and from the classroom. I got that in the budget in my first 6 months. I am a very progressive and also very pragmatic lawmaker. And so the issues that I have focused on and championed really don't change. And I've built good relationships with a lot of the Republicans up here. My Republican senator, he and I worked together on getting some things in the budget last cycle. I just had breakfast with my sheriff, who is a decent, moderate Republican, and we're working on mental health issues because it's a huge issue in his jail. And that's not where folks should be when they're dealing with a mental health or addiction crisis. So in a weird way, I probably won't get a lot of bills with my name on them this term, but the work doesn't change. I will stay focused on looking for anything I can do, working with whoever is a good faith partner to make life better for the people in my region and hopefully for the whole state. And so honestly, that doesn't change for me.
Representing common sense and also the working class. Democratic State Representative Betsy Coffia from the 103rd District. Thank you so very much for being on this week. I appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to. Enjoyed the conversation. The other thing I should mention is I'm not the top fundraiser this cycle. I was in 2022, but I'm among the top fundraisers. So the whole don't take corporate PAC money, I definitely had wiser heads, we'll say, tell me that I was doing it wrong in 2022 and I needed to change that approach and kind of do it the way it's normally done. And I just honestly chose to stay with what I had done, which was more independent and more directly accountable to my district, making the bet that folks up here would want that and would keep supporting me. And I am easily one of the top fundraisers without, again, taking a dime of corporate PAC money. It is possible. It can be done.
He spent nearly 25 years working as a liberal voice in conservative talk radio across the state, and he's still a somewhat stable person. It's the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. You can find archives of the podcast, plus Pat's musings on other topics in written form at leftoflansing.com. Left of Lansing archives are available wherever you get your podcasts. And now Left of Lansing is available on YouTube. We'd like to thank Audio Boom for distributing all our episodes so we can share progressive, otherwise known as common sense, values across Michigan and the country. Now, here's Pat Johnston.
My thanks to Democratic State Representative Betsy Coffia for being a fantastic guest this weekend, for giving some much-needed hope for many of us right now. We really need it. And thanks to the representative for her understanding as to why our interview was delayed by a week. Remember, you can listen to episodes of the show on YouTube. And this week, I've started putting up some videos that you can only see on the Left of Lansing page on YouTube. I've started posting some short videos there as well, including my takes on the disastrous mistake that some Michigan Democrats are making by joining the MAGA Michigan Republican majority in the state house on halting or weakening Michigan's new minimum wage law, which also phases out the tip wage scale for hardworking Michiganders in the service and bartending industries. I've been getting some, I wouldn't really say nice back and forth from people, but still I've been getting some back and forth with people there in the comments section. So please subscribe to the show on YouTube and, of course, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Now, you heard Representative Coffia say at the beginning of our talk that she's troubled by how so many Democrats right now are capitulating at a time when they should be fighting for their values. But this capitulation isn't helping Democrats at all or helping their brand at all. Well, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what their brand is all about, as are many of you. Because as Trump, MAGA, and the billionaire tech bro oligarchs try to inundate all of us with executive order after executive order, it appears it's driving many people down and out, which is what they want. And in a way, that's already happening on our side. I've been waiting for the next write-up by editor-in-chief of Michigan Advance, my favorite go-to for politics and cultural news in the state of Michigan, Susan Demise, who has been a great friend to the show through the years. And she's been a great progressive voice in Michigan media for many years. Now, she hasn't really written an opinion piece, I believe, since the election. I could be wrong, but I don't think she had. But she did release a brief piece this week about the difference that 8 years can make. Because 8 years ago, the women's marches happened all across the country. You remember that, right? Just before the start of the first Trump regime, and they were heavily attended. Not so much this time around. There's this deep malaise happening right now, and I get it, since this time around, actually, a majority of voters did back Trump and MAGA Republicans. It was something that didn't seem possible back in 2016. I mean, despite him winning the Electoral College votes, he lost to Hillary Clinton by some 3 million votes in 2016. And then, of course, Biden defeated him in 2020 by some 7 million votes. But Trump winning the popular vote, even by the narrowest of margins this time around, really did serve as a knockout punch to the progressive side and progressive cause. So much so, it seems like Democratic Party leaders are giving up before the fight even started. And that's what Susan Demise wrote this week in her piece titled, "The Resistance Decides It's Futile." Susan describes a major difference between the marches that took place last weekend compared to the ones from 2016, and I quote, "The most glaring change is the complete absence of politicians. At the Lansing rally this past Saturday, more than 500 activists braved the cold at the Capitol carrying signs like 'Resist, Persist, Repeat' and 'I'm a woman, not an incubator.' But not one state or federal elected official spoke or even appeared to be in attendance. Prominent pro-Palestinian, abortion rights, and civil rights groups also did not have a visible presence. No doubt many politicians and well-connected progressives were already down in Detroit for the Lions playoff game, which went about as well as the 24 election did for Dems. But that's quite the statement of their priorities." And later, Susan Demise writes, "Other leaders like Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan have struck a much more conciliatory tone towards Trump this time around, while Whitmer, who served as former Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign co-chair last year, slammed Trump as an existential threat to the nation. She issued a statement on Monday congratulating him, saying she looked forward to getting to the work on the priorities that we share. The governor also ordered U.S. and Michigan flags to be raised on Inauguration Day in accordance with Trump's presidential proclamation. Flags have been flying at half-staff to honor former President Jimmy Carter, who died on December 29th. Look, I was glad that Susan shared that last viewpoint there, because it's one that I've been echoing for the last month or so, including when it comes to Governor Whitmer, because one reason the resistance is not as resistant this time around is because of the feckless, weak, and effete leadership within the Democratic Party. Whitmer did call Trump an existential threat to the very fabric of this nation. But now she says that she can work on the priorities that we share. Well, what is she talking about? The releasing of over 1,000 Trump supporters who tried to violently overturn an election, a free election? Where are the shared priorities? Someone who signed executive orders basically saying we don't give a damn about climate change or the health of our people? I mean, how can we find shared priorities there? Or find shared priorities with someone attacking women's health or the trans community? Or finding shared priorities with someone found liable for sexual assault? These messages from our Democratic leaders, they only serve to mix everybody up. I mean, this gives mixed messages to those who voted for Democrats. And now people see Democrats like Michigan Senator Gary Peters celebrating his support for the Laken Riley Act, which is just a blatant attack on the immigrant community here in this country and is something that MAGA Republicans are making their first priority. What's going on? Why do you think the resistance is futile? Well, there we go. Or you have Senate Minority Leader, a place, by the way, I'm convinced that he'd rather be, Chuck Schumer, posted this on social media, and I quote, "It's time that we look to the future. The challenges that we face in America are many and great. The Senate must respond with resolve, bipartisanship, and fidelity to the working and middle class of this country." Ugh. Guys, you cannot have a resistance if the supposed political leaders of said resistance are already weak and not up to the fight. Perhaps that is why the resistance isn't very resistant.
You're listening to the Left of Lansing podcast. The music you're hearing is by Wanderbeats. To hear the latest project, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site. Now back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of The Left of Lansing. Remember, you can always contact me via email. That's leftoflansing@gmail.com. Follow me on Blue Sky, Facebook, Twitter, the Gram, and of course on YouTube. Subscribe to the show on YouTube. And again, subscribe wherever you listen to the show. And please give it a 5-star review. Now, before I sign off for the week, a word or two about our Detroit Lions. Yes, the Lions broke many of hearts last weekend with their stunning loss to the Washington Commanders. And I have to say, while I knew that their defense was in shambles, I always had hope, especially with home field advantage, that their offense would make it difficult for anyone to outscore them. However, after Jared Goff fumbled while getting sacked as the Lions were trying to make it 14-3 in the first half, the entire tone of the game changed. You could feel it. And from there, the Lions were always playing catch-up. And I think for the first time this year, Jared Goff felt like he had to press the situation, knowing that the defense was getting carved up by Washington's rookie yet highly impressive quarterback, Jaden Daniels. Tim Alberta is a writer for The Atlantic, and he grew up in the Brighton area, and he's written some great pieces on the MAGA movement and the Christian nationalist movement within the MAGA movement as well. Anyway, he posted some thoughts on that sack fumble that I just talked about, and he wrote, "That play would come to epitomize a bizarre game and fans' collective sense of bewilderment. Put simply, this performance was a betrayal of everything the Lions have been about. We got glitzy when grit was needed most. We were stubborn when circumstances called for creativity. We played to the opponent's strengths instead of our own. Injuries are no excuse. The guys who have carried us, elite coach, hotshot coordinators, star quarterback, choked when it mattered the most." Wow. All right. Harsh words. But I agree with him. And I also agree with Tim Alberta on how this loss will haunt Lions fans more than last year's loss against the 49ers or other playoff losses from the distant past. However, I will say this. These losses are always going to be magnified because the Lions are actually a good team, and good teams come with expectations. If you want a good team, you're going to have to deal with some real painful losses. I do believe the Lions will get healthy in the offseason and not suffer so many devastating injuries next year. And I believe in general manager Brad Holmes and finding a few gems in the draft as well as some good players in free agency. But I also believe head coach Dan Campbell is a hell of a coach, and he'll find new coordinators who will keep the Lions rolling next year. Good coaches can do just that. Disappointment? Yes. Despair? No, not at all. They'll be a stronger team next year, and they won't even win 15 games next year either, but they'll still be stronger and more prepared for a long playoff run. That is my early 2025 take on the Detroit Lions. Until next week, remember, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan!
The Left of Lansing podcast was produced by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and hosted by, yes, Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. And thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. Remember to visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to the Left of Lansing podcast.